And the sympathetic arm of the autonomic nervous system, I know that's a mouthful, is responsible for generating states of alertness in our brain and body. Everything from panic to being alert and calm, our tendency to move or our likelihood of moving under pressure. It is also responsible for our ability to resist movement when we need to resist movement, and therefore it's an active process. So the sympathetic nervous system is all the things of action, and when it is involved in generating inaction, those are cases where inaction requires energy, okay? I want to be very clear about this. The sympathetic nervous system isn't just about moving our body, although it has a lot to do with that. It is also responsible for our ability to resist movement or thought or emotion when we need to do that, clamp down on ourselves. The parasympathetic aspect of our autonomic nervous system is the one that's sometimes referred to as the rest and digest neural circuits and chemicals. And that's true, but there's a lot more to the parasympathetic component of the autonomic nervous system. It's also responsible for falling asleep. It's responsible for us feeling relaxed. It is responsible for most of the states of mind and body in which we are quiescent, where we don't feel an impulse to move, or when we have a difficult time getting into action. So the sympathetic and the parasympathetic aspect of the autonomic nervous system are always in a push-pull with one another. Think of them more or less on a teeter-totter. When one end goes up, the other end goes down. They're really in competition with one another, and it's their balance that reflects how alert or how sleepy we happen to be. Now, the reason I'm giving you this rather geeky, nerd speak, nomenclature-filled discussion about the autonomic nervous system in the context of willpower is that regardless of whether or not you believe willpower is a limited or an unlimited resource, we know one thing for sure, and that's that willpower and tenacity ride on our current autonomic function. We can translate that to everyday language by saying that when we are well rested, for instance, when we've been getting great sleep of sufficient duration the previous night and the night before that, our level of tenacity and willpower to engage in things that we would not ordinarily engage in by default, and our ability to resist behaviors and thought patterns that would otherwise be our default behaviors and thought patterns, is much higher. Conversely, when we are not getting enough quality sleep on a regular basis, our ability to call on tenacity and willpower is diminished. Now, that series of statements I just made is clearly going to be a duh for most people, but it is very important to understand that when we are sleep deprived, when we are in physical pain, when we are in emotional pain, and or when we are distracted, when we are thinking about something else aside from what we are trying to engage tenacity and willpower in order to do or not do, tenacity and willpower will be diminished. Now, all of those things together are just a bigger duh. We all know this. If you've got a splinter in your foot, it's really hard to think about not thinking about something else. If you are extremely hungry, or if you had an argument with somebody that you really care about and they said something that was particularly vexing to you and it's looping around in your head, it's going to be very hard to engage in something else that you need to do because you're going to be distracted. Likewise, if you're sleep deprived, likewise, if you are a bit sick or run down, if you're in any kind of physical or emotional pain, your ability to draw on tenacity and willpower will be diminished. So it's an absolute truth that your ability to generate tenacity and willpower rides on a reservoir of autonomic function. And today, we don't really have a way of quantifying the level of autonomic function or dysfunction in a very simple way. It's not like resting heart rate, although resting heart rate is involved. For instance, if you haven't slept well for a few nights, or if you're particularly stressed, overtrained, you'll wake up in the morning with a significantly elevated heart rate. However, there is no simple metric like heart rate or blood pressure or even cortisol level that can tell you whether or not your autonomic function is in balance, that is, the sympathetic and parasympathetic systems of your autonomic nervous system are in the best possible balance to generate tenacity and willpower. We don't yet have such a metric, although there are companies that are starting to develop devices that hopefully will give us indices of autonomic function or dysfunction. But it is important that we acknowledge that if you're not taking care of the foundational modulators of tenacity and willpower, none of the subsequent tools and protocols that we will discuss are going to help you that much over time. You might get tenacity and willpower to engage one day when you're very sleep deprived, but it's going to be very difficult to consistently engage tenacity and willpower. For that reason, if you have any struggles with sleep, that is getting enough quality sleep on a regular basis, please see the zero cost toolkit for sleep that we've put at hubermanlab.com. Please also see the Perfect Your Sleep, Master Your Sleep episodes, also at hubermanlab.com. And please also see the episode with expert guest, Dr. Matthew Walker, professor of sleep neuroscience and psychology at University of California, Berkeley. We just revamped the Huberman Lab website. So if you go to hubermanlab.com and you put something like sleep into the search function, it will take you not just to the toolkit for sleep, but to the exact timestamps that will queue up particular topics and protocols around sleep. So if you were to put sleep and light, it would take you to those particular protocols. If you were to put sleep and magnesium threonate, it would take you to those particular protocols, and so on and so forth. Yeah, I don't want to get too far off topic here during today's discussion, but if you're not sleeping well, and if you're not managing your stress levels well, it's going to be much harder for you to engage tenacity and willpower, regardless of the tools you happen to use. And those tools could be everything from behavioral tools to supplements to prescription drugs. You need to get those foundational modulators in check. And there are a lot of zero-cost ways to do that are all spelled out very clearly at the resources I just described. Likewise, for stress, if you're experiencing challenges with stress, both short-term, medium-term, or long-term stress, if you think you have elevated cortisol levels, which, by the way, may not be the case, there are a lot of tools for modulating stress in real time, increasing your stress threshold, etc. Simply go to the hubermanlab.com website and put in stress threshold tools or stress real-time tools, and you'll get a bunch of zero-cost tools that will allow you to do that. It's also worth mentioning that when we get to our discussion about the neuroscience of tenacity and willpower, that you will understand why autonomic health and autonomic function is so important for our ability to engage tenacity and willpower. I'll just tell you right now, it's because the neural circuits of the autonomic nervous system provide direct and robust input to this hub in the brain, this brain location that governs our ability to allocate our mind and body toward particular activities or to resist particular activities. As many of you know, I've been taking AG1 daily since 2012, so I'm delighted that they're sponsoring the podcast. AG1 is a vitamin mineral probiotic drink that's designed to meet all of your foundational nutrition needs. Now, of course, I try to get enough servings of vitamins and minerals through whole food sources that include vegetables and fruits every day, but oftentimes I simply can't get enough servings. But with AG1, I'm sure to get enough vitamins and minerals and the probiotics that I need, and it also contains adaptogens to help buffer stress. Simply put, I always feel better when I take AG1. I have more focus and energy, and I sleep better, and it also happens to taste great. For all these reasons, whenever I'm asked if you could take just one supplement, what would it be? I answer AG1. If you'd like to try AG1, go to drinkag1.com/Huberman to claim a special offer. They'll give you 5 free travel packs plus a year's supply of vitamin D3K2. Again, that's drinkag1.com/Huberman. Okay, so let's think about the Baumeister data on willpower as a limited resource. I'm going to briefly describe one of the first studies that really said to the field, willpower is a limited resource. But I want to be clear that there are other studies like it, and they all generally follow the same contour. And that general contour is as follows. Baumeister and colleagues, and now many other laboratories, have done experiments where they bring human subjects into the laboratory. And those human subjects have to do something that requires mental effort or energy, aka willpower. The classic example of this is you bring people into the laboratory. Some of them might actually be dieting or fasted, although not always. And there are 2 platters set out for them. One platter contains radishes, just plain radishes. By the way, I hate radishes unless they're pickled radishes. I don't know why that is. So these experiments picked my least favorite vegetable. I love many other vegetables. I disdain the radish. That was just a personal editorial. In any case, the radishes are set out, and next to them are freshly baked cookies. And in the room is the wafting aromas of freshly baked cookies. So I think it's fair to say that most people, because of a hardwired tendency to like sugar and fat, especially when they are combined, would prefer to eat the cookies versus the radishes. I know that there are some mutants out there that are saying, I like radishes more than cookies, but look, most people like cookies more than radishes. The subjects in these studies are divided into 2 groups. One group is told you have to resist eating the radishes. The other group is told you have to resist eating the cookies. And then the subjects are observed during this time, typically, but this is really not what the experiment is about per se. This stage of the experiment is really designed to get people to resist a certain kind of behavior. And the assumption, again, this is an assumption because there's no brain recordings here. No one's in an MRI machine looking at what brain areas are activated or not activated. There's no cortisol being measured, at least not in these early experiments. These people are either resisting something that's pretty easy to resist, radishes, or they are being asked to resist something that for most people is going to be harder to resist than resisting radishes, which is resisting freshly baked cookies. And that challenge has been made even more difficult by the wafting aromas of freshly baked cookies in the room, and in some cases has been made even more difficult because these people are dieting. And keep in mind that when you calorie restrict, or when you put yourself on a diet of any kind, there is a well-established mechanism in the brain by which the neurons that engage hunger, especially hunger for fat and sugar, and that respond to things like aromas and tastes are heightened. That is, their activity levels are heightened, which means that things that smell really good smell really, really good when you're hungry. Things that ordinarily would taste really good taste really, really, really good when you finally eat them. So the key component of this stage of the experiment is to engage people's willpower. The second part of the experiment has all of the subjects separately engage in another challenging task. And the challenging task that they are asked to engage in is to solve a particular puzzle. And again, different experiments use different puzzles, different experiments use different contexts, but the original experiments that Baumeister and colleagues did had people try and solve a puzzle that could not be solved. So it's very, very difficult. In fact, it's impossible. But the subjects weren't aware of that. And then what was measured was how long subjects persisted in trying to solve this impossible to solve puzzle, depending on whether or not previously they had to resist the radishes, which is pretty easy to resist, or resist the cookies, which is at least harder to resist, and for some people would be very, very hard to resist. Now, you can probably already guess what the outcome of this and similar studies was, because it birthed this entire belief camp within the field of psychology that willpower is a limited resource. The outcome was that if people had to resist the cookies, which is harder to do than resisting the radishes, that they would persist for less time when they had to try and solve a puzzle that, unbeknownst to them, could not be solved. Conversely, if people had to resist something that was pretty easy to resist,